Let's talk about A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. And my opinion about this game is that it's solid but flawed. I really feel like the first two-thirds of this game are really good, and then the last third kind of drags. It's insane to me, though, that when I was playing this game, I was okay with how slow you moved through all these different sections. And I think that's primarily due to the fact that some of the set pieces found here in this game are really good. And as almost every set piece is essentially a stealth puzzle, I was having a great time. I like the fact that you're outsmarting this monster, and then there's all these really tense moments that grab you early on. But when you get to that back third, for whatever reason, you are opening more doors and cabinets and all that stuff, and I'm noticing just how repetitive this is, because if you go over a certain noise threshold, that monster is just going to bear down on you very quickly. Once you reach that back third, there's a new mechanic introduced in the form of a sensory scream that the monsters use to find you when you're in water. So, in these moments, you have to stop completely. Your controller shakes, your screen shakes. If you move, the monsters immediately attack your position. And I thought that was a pretty cool mechanic, but I did not know how grating it was going to be because you have to stop constantly now. And in a game where you are moving freely up until you get to that point, it can be pretty jarring that you have to stop and slow yourself down constantly. This is the type of game that requires you to manage certain resources. You really have to manage your breathing because your character has asthma, so you have to find pills and all this other stuff in the environment to help you manage that. And I feel like that's fine because resources are pretty plentiful, especially if you're playing on normal or easy. But if you're playing this on hard, imagine having to stop constantly and having your lungs go out and have to stop all these different panic attacks because the monster is just stopping you constantly, because when they scream Alex panics, you would too, because these monsters are freaky. And I really feel like when you get near the end of the game, all of the tedium that is involved with the gameplay mechanics really start to become frustrating because you're opening up so many different doors. And it was one of those things where I'm like, I really feel like this is elongating the game. And that's crazy to me because this is a game that can be completed in under 7 hours. Everything in the first two-thirds was really fun. And that was because you had all these different set pieces. You were constantly going from places like the hospital to the woods to this really big campsite, a train station. All of that was really cool. I really enjoyed it. I was very excited to get through these sections. I loved all the little stealthy puzzle parts. I felt like, hey, this is all going great. And then I got to the end of the game, and then I felt like the novelty of the mechanics really wore off. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing problematic with a slower pace in games. I really feel like what's happening here fits the tone of the universe it's set in, but I do believe the fact that you have to be careful in everything that you do or you're dead really makes the game feel longer than it should. And I think for some players, it's going to be really dull opening up all these different doors or cabinets or shelves, whatever, to look for resources or get to new sections, especially when you're trying to pull yourself up over something and you're moving as slow as possible and it's always costing you stamina. Eventually, you're going to become frustrated with this type of gameplay. You're going to be frustrated with that type of tedium, and that's going to take away from the fun factor of this game, because to me, the best parts of The Road Ahead are the sections in which you are constantly trying to solve the puzzle of how do I get away from the monster? How do I move them to this section so that I can open up a certain gate, turn this valve, get a certain item, all that type of stuff. I think that when the game puts you squarely in one of those set pieces where it's do or die, that's when this game is at its best. But I really feel like the moments after, in which there are lulls in the action, is where the game loses its momentum. And I really think it's crazy because I enjoyed this game up until I got to the end. I was having a good time navigating the city, the different levels, and I don't care if a game is linear. And in terms of The Road Ahead, you are given some freedom in terms of what you can and can't do when you're trying to escape or maneuver around the monster. In all, I really liked all that stuff. I also thought the game scaled pretty well. But the issue is that I probably overlooked some of the more tedious elements in this game because they weren't as pronounced as they were when you got to the end. And I don't think I've played a game this year in which you had a really good start, a really good middle section, and then just a poor third. I honestly feel like the developers had the right idea because there are some really cool set pieces at the end. It's just a chore to get through them. And I think that's probably the one thing that's going to stand out for me when I talk about this game, is that the road ahead has so many cool ideas and concepts and set pieces. It's just that the execution of them at times feels like a bridge too far. I believe that the unevenness is probably what really hampered my enjoyment overall in this game. And I really feel like if there was just a bit more freedom at the end and less obstacles that intentionally slowed you down because that's just how the mechanics are, I really feel like this game would have been an easy recommendation and probably one of my favorite AA indie titles of the year, because that's the thing. I really feel like everything else here is good, minus the monster AI, which I think for the most part works, but can be really finicky in some sections, and I'll talk about that later. But I think that when you kind of take a step back and look at the production values for this game, they really pop. This game overall is visually really, really good. The only problem I have is that, and it's kind of funny, is the yellow paint found here to identify ledges and certain obstacles and stuff that you can interact with is excessive. And what's really funny is that there's a section in the game during a flashback where you have to pick up beer and then put it on a table. And when you're picking up that beer, in any other game, if there is an open space, you just go up to that table, and if you see an indicator, you just press A. But here, you have to put the beer down where the paint is, which looks really weird given that when you're looking at this environment, when you're looking around, you're like, holy crap, this part looks good. And then it's like yellow paint on a table. Why? It doesn't have to be there. That's practically my only gripe with the visuals here, because everything else, to me at least, looks great. I loved going through the forest. I loved watching the leaves and trees just kind of whip back and forth through the wind. I like going through the different houses and seeing how detailed and cluttered they were. Probably my favorite detail in this game is when one of the monsters breaks through the doors. I think it looks so cool. Also, when you're going through these different sections indoors, you do have notes that are strewn about, and you can read them and they can give you some background about the people who live there. And if you're wondering what happened to these individuals, you don't have to do too much thinking, because you can just see the impact through the walls and just look at how torn up these places are. It's just all very well done. I was really impressed. Now, it's not all great because there are some stuttering issues, but I don't think they were as pronounced as some reviews on Steam made it out to be. And I think primarily that's because I picked the game up after a patch was put through, so more than likely that's probably the reason behind it, but I didn't see too much slowdown. I think the most pronounced stuttering was when you're going through the doors that led to a new section, but beyond that, I didn't really have any issues. And once again, visually, I really enjoyed what was here. I was really happy with what I saw. I like the way the monsters look also, and usually when I play these types of games, when I watch these types of movies, and it's about a monster that you have to follow or follows the main characters, I'm not too keen on seeing them constantly. I feel like it ruins the tension. But honestly, I was cool with it here because the monster shows up and, you know, its head opens up when it's trying to sense everything. And that looked amazing. I was like, this is fantastic. The detail on it is just so cool, and it honestly never gets old watching the monster tear through people, tear through sections, or even tear through you. It's really cool, and you should try at least once or twice to intentionally get killed to see some of the cutscenes because they are really well done. And I also feel like, if you're wondering about the audio, that just enhances the overall experience. It's great. I really recommend that if you happen to pick up this game, even with the flaws that it has, you play it with headphones on. And you have to play it with a mic on as well. So here's the catch to A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. And it's not anything that's really new. If you turn on your mic, it allows the game to not only hear your voice and the noises you're making when you're panicking because you're probably getting a little squeamish, but also the noises you make when you're moving and shifting around. So it really takes in the environmental noise as well, and it essentially allows the game to punish you for being loud. Like I said, this has been done before in other titles. I do think, though, it's implemented well here, and I think it does enhance the experience overall. So if you do want to feel more tension, then by all means, play with the mic on. I just feel like with the audio and visual stuff, it's just great overall and they complement one another. So before I dive into the narrative, I do want to talk about the monster AI. I mentioned before that it was finicky. I think overall it's pretty good, but it felt like sometimes that you'd have moments where you would go into an area and then it would just stop where it was because it had initially sensed that you had made a noise, and you could have made a noise that was within the acceptable threshold, but the game doesn't care about that. It felt like the AI was just sitting there like, you're gonna make a move, I know you're here, and I'm gonna kill you. And early on, you do not have anything to distract the monster with. So basically, they were cutting off your only means of getting out. And because the monster wouldn't leave, it would just lead to a cheap death. And the thing is, you're playing within that decibel threshold. It's what the game essentially revolves around. You just can't be loud. So, but if you happen to move a certain way, you'll see on one of the devices that you have that you'll see your noise threshold. And if it goes past a certain point, the monster is going to notice you. Now, they don't necessarily like leap at you, but there were moments where it felt like that monster is a little bit on me too quickly and now it won't leave. What's going on? And I was playing within the game's means, but the AI would just randomly stalk me. And I thought that that was kind of frustrating, but it was also unintentionally hilarious because there was a section in the game where I brought down these warehouse chains and I was getting through this area and I'm pulling the barrels out of the way of this door because it was obstructing my way through. And I felt like I had thrown this brick and it was thrown pretty far and I was distracting the monster and I was gonna just be okay with getting through the door. But then the monster just kind of wandered its way back to where I threw the brick, where the chains were, and then stopped and turned and faced the door that I was supposed to exit out of. Now, obviously these monsters are blind, but what was really funny is that when I was moving a barrel out of the way, the monster stood there and then it slammed its arm down like it was shit talking me. So it broke that one barrel and said, you need to get this out of the way and keep moving because I've got places to be. So I turned around and obliged that request. I moved the last barrel out of the way, turned around to face the door because my character at this point is really panicking, and just opened the door and then got a cutscene. It was the weirdest thing that I've seen in the game because for the most part, I thought the AI was doing a decent job. But like I said, there are times where it's super finicky, which can really lead to an uneven experience when you're trying to stealthily get through some of these sections. And for some reason, the monster AI just refuses to leave an area in which you're trying to escape through. It only happened a few times, but when it happened, it was really noticeable. So with all that out of the way, we have finally arrived at the narrative, and without spoiling anything, I'm gonna say that if this movie had to be placed near the other films set in the Quiet Place franchise, it is, in my opinion, probably the worst movie of the bunch. That sounds harsh, but I think that this is the type of film that you've seen before. The plot is really generic. You've more than likely seen this 100 times in different genres. And one of the things is that there are a number of horror movies that really try to emulate the lone survivor type stuff. They try to pull at your heartstrings a little bit early on by trying to have these different emotional moments with certain characters. But a lot of it really falls flat because you've seen it executed better elsewhere, and you don't really get to know any of these characters. You just know that they have a connection to Alex, the main character, but beyond that, you don't know anything about them. And while I believe that Alex's plight in this world is indeed something that I think I would be interested in, I think the way it plays out is just okay. I think the weirdest thing, and probably the most damning thing about the narrative, is that you have an entire lull where certain plot threads just kind of end, and then there's nothing of note that happens. Like, there's certain characters that they introduce that you think is going to have a big impact in the game, and then they're just kind of there for a couple moments, and that's it. You know, these are the types of single player titles where there's an emphasis on the narrative, and I expected there to be some type of consistency there, but there's not. Which, if I think about it, it does kind of add to the unevenness with the gameplay. So you have the unevenness with the gameplay, the monster AI, and then ultimately the narrative. It kind of just all fits together, which, you know, really plays into my entire solid but flawed argument for this game. When I make these videos, whether they're reviews, recommendations, just impressions, that type of stuff, I try to be as transparent as possible, and I try to be balanced. Like, I don't want to say that The Road Ahead is a game that is completely devoid of fun. It's not. But this is one of those games where I say that your enjoyment of the game is going to depend on your tolerance of the gameplay mechanics. You're going to have to actually be okay with the slower pace and the emphasis on stealth, and then the emphasis on moving as slowly as possible through areas and trying to keep it at a certain noise threshold. I really feel like if you play this game on easy, it might be a really enjoyable experience, especially for those of you who are fans of the movie franchise. But for those individuals out there who are veterans of the Outlast series or Alien Isolation or other games like that, I really feel like if you try to play this on hard, because those individuals are more than likely content creators, they're streamers, whatever, then you're going to have a lot of patience to deal and navigate with all that tedium and still enjoy yourself while doing so. Because I really feel like if you play this casually or on normal, it's not going to be as noticeable or as bad, because imagine having to escape and outwit the creature constantly on hard mode while you are slowly opening doors and cabinets and all that stuff. It just doesn't sound fun unless you're a gaming masochist, and then by all means do your thing. I'm not going to try to stop you. But I really feel like the moment that they start to restrict your freedom, the moment they introduce that scream mechanic where you have to stop or you get punished or you get killed, it's one of those things where it's like, that's a love and hate type of deal, and it takes a special type of tolerance for that. But those are my thoughts on A Quiet Place: A Road Home. Solid but flawed. It's out on Steam right now. It's $30. If you've played this game, let me know what you think in the comments, because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.